Sustainable finance does not mean that you're just providing financing towards something that is green.
What is sustainable finance?
The way I think about it is that there's the risk side of it. So for example, we have our own position statements around extractive industries. On the business side of things, it's how do you help a client that is looking to raise funding? So what kind of risks can we mitigate and what kind of structures can we put in place in order to provide a solution? It also means how you try to mobilize capital by bringing in different partners, how you bring in public capital with private capital and you scale up more private capital into projects. What we usually tell our clients in other organizations is make sure that you're bringing us on as early on as possible, because we can then direct towards the tweaks that you need to make in order to make projects bankable.
Lina is the Regional Head, Sustainable Finance, Middle East and Africa, Corporate and Investment Banking, Standard Chartered Bank. She has over 19 years of banking experience, delivering innovative deal origination and execution across various industries and regions. In her current role, Lina has developed key relationships with clients, advising them on sustainable finance solutions and instruments, and on suitable transition opportunities for their businesses. Lina holds a bachelor's degree on accounting and finance from the American University of Sharjah with a minor in economics and an MBA with distinction from London Business School. What would be your advice to young people that are trying to build a career in terms of bringing value to the business?
One, be curious. Being technical in the beginning was very helpful. Be passionate about what you do. Don't worry about the money. It will come. Final thing I would say, your career is never going to be a straight line. Make the move.
Let's start with your background. What was Lina like many years ago, and how did you find your way into what you're doing today?
So my background has always been in banking through and through. I have been with Standard Chartered Bank ever since I started my career. I joke about this and I tell my friends, colleagues, team, I bleed blue and green. I've been with the bank for such a long time. But I started off my career as an international graduate. At the time, we had a graduate training program. It was very, very helpful to kind of, find your way around what you want to do, understand the system, understand the bank, how things work. And then I moved into kind of more on the corporate finance side of things. The bank has created that great platform for you to be able to get that international experience. I was able to work in Dubai, in London, in Singapore, and it gave that perspective of things that matter and how you could get that different type or diversified experience. So I've done a role within corporate finance in a team that does financing solutions and structured type of lending solutions for clients. Covering Africa, East Africa at the time. And then I moved back to Dubai to do a little bit of a similar role, but for a different region. And then I did a coverage role where I was part of a team that was looking after relationships with sovereign wealth funds and asset managers in MENA. And as part of that role, our clients were much more involved in, or were starting to get a lot more involved in sustainability and access to sustainable finance. What it means, the implications, and all of that. At the same time, within the bank, at a kind of more global level, we had started a team within sustainable finance that does origination. Within Standard Chartered, we've always been doing sustainability one way or another, whether it's from the risk side or the business side, for over 20 plus years, or even longer than that. But we, creating that team was more to put together in perspective how we can actually cater for the demands of our clients. How do we customize our offering, our product offering, and take it from there. I was interacting quite a lot with that team, given the demand that was coming from my clients. And then, the global head at the time wanted to set up a team within Africa, for Africa and the Middle East, to look at how we could take that forward and have a more focused approach. One of the biggest things about sustainability and sustainable finance, and you hear that from a lot of our clients, is it's always important to take the local and the regional context into the equation when you are structuring any type of transactions.
Mhm.
So my background in kind of structuring in on the product side a little bit as well, but also on the coverage side, helped a lot with me kind of taking on that. It was a lot of learning. It was very interesting to start off with it. I mean, looking at what I knew back then versus what I know now is quite humbling, to be honest, as to how you grew up. Like, I grew up with this industry as well, and I kind of saw it, when it started in this part of the world becoming more serious. It was there before, but like when it started to become a lot more interactive as well, was quite interesting to kind of grow up with that and learn from the market, but also provide some views as to what we are seeing in other markets as well, and having that accessibility.
Right. So you moved from corporate finance, found your way into sustainable finance. So what is sustainable finance?
So sustainable finance is a very kind of wide term. So for example, what we the way that we look at it, and I think, every, like, I speak to a lot of my peers and other banks, and every bank does it a little bit differently or with a twist, depending on the setup, the operations, the clientele that they cater to. But from our perspective, the way that we are set up is to actually look at how do we, number one, look at transactions that we're already doing within the bank and actually trying to make them more sustainability linked. And by sustainability linked, I mean having an element of sustainability in them, in order for us to encourage our clients, to encourage our clients to do more on the sustainability side. Um, Showing them what others are doing in their industry, how it could impact their operations in a positive way, obviously, and how they can even tap into that so-called sustainable finance pocket of liquidity. So there are pockets of liquidity, there are pockets of capital out there, be it on from an investor equity side of the equation, fixed investors as well, fixed income investors as well, and lenders that are dedicating capital specifically towards financing or investing in green, social, or a combination of that sustainability projects. Sustainable finance does not mean that you're just providing financing towards something that is green, a solar project, for example. That's the kind of most obvious, if you like, way of looking at it. But it also means how you try to mobilize capital by bringing in different partners. So blended finance is a good example of that. And what blended finance means is how you bring in public capital with private capital, and you scale up more private capital into projects. It could also mean bringing in different parties to the table, even sometimes conservation entities, organizations that you bring in to add a level of credibility to investors that are looking to place their money in specific types of, they've dedicated funding for specific types of projects where they want to, let's say, go into nature, for instance. So yeah, then you go into right, I've given that money, how do I actually know it went where it needs to? That credibility that needs to be added. It also means looking at new markets, for example, the carbon markets, and how that's developing, how that could be utilized. Obviously, there are a lot of things that we need to take into account when we're looking at the carbon markets, and we know and appreciate that. And that's why it's even more important to have a dedicated focus on how you bring in financing or bring in that market into existence.
So what I hear you say with sustainable finance is basically twofold. One, you look at it from your general portfolio in the bank, actively pushing your portfolio and the clients to be more sustainable.
Yeah.
You include you include sustainability matrix as part of the evaluation, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we have the way that you look at that we look at sustainability within the bank is there's and that's how I think about it. Generally, there's other elements of it, but the way I think about it is that there's the risk side of it. So, for example, we have our own position statements around extractive industries like coal, power, utilities, Ramsar sites, etc. And within those, there are things that we can absolutely not do.
Keep your money.
There are other things where we can do, but we are helping a client with how you can actually do it in a better way, or in more environmentally or social friendly way.
Yeah.
That's kind of more on the risk side of things. But on the business side of things, it's basically how do you help a client or an entity that is looking to raise funding for it could be a solar project, let's take that example, but is actually struggling with raising debt, let alone like forget about the sustainability angle because of its size, its location. So what kind of risks can we mitigate, and what kind of structures can we put in place in order to provide a solution for that client? And it could be through different ways. It could be through things like blended finance, like I mentioned. It could be just the way that you structure the transaction and all of that, in order for you to help mobilize that funding.
Right.
Part of it is that we have made a commitment to get to net zero from our financed emissions by 2050. And again, what that means for our audience, what that means is that we want to make sure that as much as possible of our financing is going towards a green project, and therefore expanding our assets of green financing, in order to achieve that net zero position. Now, what that means is that we have to get our clients to also take on that ambition, but at the same time, rather than making it or looking at it from the perspective of it being a cost incurring type of objective, there are actually benefits to it. And it's really interesting because when I first started off in doing this, the conversation has now shifted from, why is this beneficial to me, to I want to do this because I already know how beneficial it is to me, because I already see the benefits of it. I mean, I sometimes just for fun, I ask clients like, why are you doing this? I recently asked a client that does steel and is building its own captive power, and through a solar project that they were building. I'm like, why are you doing this? And they were like, well, because it makes sense. It was in one of the markets in on the African continent. And they were like, it makes sense from a cost perspective, from a volatility and predictability perspective. For us, it makes sense. So for some, it depends on the industry, but for some, it makes more sense than others in how you get. It could be the access to financing. It could be continuing to access financing because you're in a hard to abate sector, and you have international lending or international lenders. And they're asking you questions. They're asking you, what do you do? Part of what we do is actually help clients or advise clients on what what we think we need to see as banks, as investors, in order for you to continue to do that, and then support them with actually doing a lot of that work.
Yeah, I think it absolutely makes sense, because if clients you talked about risk, for example.
Yeah.
If you're given finance to an hard to abate sector, and you see that they have all those mitigants for their risk, is that there is a continuous stream of funding for them, plus the cost of capital might not be as high than if that hard to abate sector still has the risk with nothing done, and the cost of capital goes up as well.
Exactly, and it's also about how you think about the it's not just the risk, it's not just the opportunity of taking advantage of a market that is evolving and growing, but it's also the risk of doing nothing about it. So even like you could just say, what, this is just something that's I'm not going to get involved in it. It doesn't impact me. It doesn't or whatever, but it will impact you. Like whether you like it or not, at some point we're seeing regulations evolve. We're seeing in the UAE, for example, there's an ESG reporting law that came into effect in May. And we're seeing that across the board. The UAE is just an example. We're seeing that across the board in terms of consultation papers that we get from central banks, or discussions that central banks or authorities, like regulatory authorities, are asking for. So that also, that is also helpful from that perspective. And don't forget, we operate in, I say that, obviously my view is biased, but we operate in some of the world's most interesting markets. So here in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, as a bank, if you look at the source of GDP growth on average across these markets, it is from the hard to abate sector. It is from the extractive industries. It is from fossil fuels and all of that. So it's about how we look at, becoming more efficient. How do we look at international regulations that could potentially impact us? CBAM is an example in Europe, and how that's going to impact exports/imports into Europe. So those are some of the things that we like to keep discussing with our clients so that they're aware of it, they understand the implications, they know what they could potentially do about it. And we try to do that ahead of time. Like we know that, for example, a regulation is going to come out, or it will come into effect at a certain period of time. We start preparing for this and the implications for it. We do that work ahead of time.
Yeah, and it's good you mentioned, the presence of the bank in Asia, Middle East,
Africa.
and Africa,
Yeah.
right? And I think it brings me to my next question in terms of these regions are greatly affected by global warming. You see the floods and extreme weather. Recently, I think it was in India where they had a major flood.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it brings me to the question of the reason why sustainable finance is important.
Yeah.
So, would you like to tell us more about why it is important, especially for this region,
Yeah.
and the challenges that you've faced trying to source funds?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that keeps coming up when I speak to a lot of our African clients, or when when I'm attending events, is a comment that comes out often about how, Africa really does not contribute that much to global emissions.
Yes.
Right. Unfortunately, it is one of the places in the world that stand to lose quite a lot from lack of doing anything, because of, when we talk about climate, we don't just talk about climate mitigation. We are trying to reduce our CO2 emissions, but we're also now have to face a reality of adaptation.
Right.
We have to adapt to a warmer planet. I mean, we saw floods everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's not just kind of limited to a specific market or specific region. We see floods, we see all these things happening all over. So we need to now put in place measures that will help us ensure that properties, for example, are protected
Right.
when there is a flood. You want to make sure that your infrastructure is basically in place for you to be able to sustain your business. If you have a solar park and it floods tomorrow, what do you do, right? So those are the things that we are looking at, and we've actually one of the things that we've created at Standard Chartered is these innovation hubs within the bank that look at specifically how we provide financing to these types of transactions, these types of projects, sorry, and ensuring that we are raising that level of awareness with clients. Although sometimes we don't really need to, like, they know what the challenges they're going to face are. But how do you put in place financing for that is where our role comes in.
Yeah.
One of those innovation hubs is focused on adaptation finance, and we've actually put in place a report that came out a couple of years ago on adaptation finance that we co-authored with KPMG and the UN, that speaks about it's more of a framework around adaptation, what it means, and adaptation finance, what it means, the kind of categories of projects that should be considered as adaptation. And the reason, some people might say, okay, this is just labeling, right? Like it's another one. It's financing. It's you're adding a label of adaptation. It might be, yes, it probably is in some cases, but in other cases, it also means that there is a specific focus on a market that is looking at how it adapts to these changing weather conditions. But it also means that you have specific, again, going back to the point on partners, including MDBs, DFIs, international kind of organizations, conservation organizations, banks, investors, etc., that are dedicating pools of capital, and sometimes even even the technical assistance side of things that will help with directing that capital and matching the projects with each other. And you can't imagine how sometimes difficult it is to actually say, right, one of the biggest points that gets made in our industry is all of this money is dedicated, but then all of these projects still need financing. So where's how do you match that? And that's what what our job is to a certain extent, at least with our client base.
So what are the challenges you face? Is it a case of lack of credible projects or,
Um,
or not enough finance?
I think I think it's a mix of things, to be honest, and it also depends on the market. And that's why, going back to my initial point, you need to take the market nuances into account when you're, um, addressing the challenges. So every challenge basically comes with its own kind of issues and complications. And then you kind of go in and try to solve for that. And sometimes it's structure, sometimes it's other things. Um, some of the challenges that we face is just pure access to funding, and how you put in place the right funding for for some projects. Some projects, for example, are too small, or they are from sponsors who we don't know, or it's a little bit scattered in terms of where it's coming from. It sometimes could be also related to the credibility of certain projects from a credit perspective.
Right.
When I talk about credibility, it's not about reputation or any of that. That there obviously there is that side of
the
things,
viability of the project.
but the viability of the project, the commercial viability of the project, and it being able to stand on its own, is sometimes also a challenge. Another challenge, actually, which is also a bit of an interesting challenge, is how you kind of look at financing some of the new technologies that are coming up. They're not new technologies anymore, but for example, where there is no market for them. So there is no kind of live day-to-day market, for instance, for sustainable aviation fuel, for hydrogen. How do we put in the right structures that will get the banks comfortable, and will have a large enough project, and will get, we still have to deal with our credit teams. So again, this is very different to CSR, where you're doing something different completely in that case. In this case, we are actually doing something that is aligned with our business strategy as a bank, and therefore we still have to report to our credit team. We still have to explain how that makes sense. So some of these are some of the challenges. I think another challenge is probably the availability of data, and ensuring the kind of the whole greenwashing angle is addressed.
Absolutely.
Because that's a big right?
issue.
As an investor, you want to know where your money is going, and you want to know that when I put that money in a project, over the life of the project, I'm actually getting feedback on the impact it's creating, how the money is being spent, how this is adding value, etc. So sometimes that data relies on proxies as well, but ensuring that angle is there is also an extra level of work that the company will have to do, over and above, the crazy amount of work that has to go into any transaction that you close, whether it's sustainability or not. But you're adding that extra level of work as well. So sometimes it's also about finding solutions for how do we make it easier? What is the kind of easiest way to do it, but at the same time is still credible enough and acceptable to us as a bank, to investors, where we are looking at, for example, fixed income transactions.
Right. So I was going to ask you another question, but it looks like you've answered it, because my question would have been, what is the bigger challenge you see? Is it the case of projects, or is it the case of finance? But you already answered that. It's nuance to the.
It's nuance. It's honestly nuance. Like, for example, if I take two separate continents, and even within the continents, or the regions, sorry, in this case, even within the regions, you will find there are very different challenges. For example, in the UAE, in comparison to Oman or Bahrain, for instance, even within the same region.
Right.
But if you look at, like, for example, what we do in the Middle East and versus Africa, for instance, and obviously I have the luxury of being able to see both sides. The conversations because of the challenges, the conversations are very different in terms of what makes more sense here versus what makes more sense.
Right.
And it's a factor of you know, geographies. It's a factor of what you can actually do, the resources available, the credit risk as well is very important. So all of these things play a role in how you address the challenges.
Yes. But are you able to advise the clients based on some of the successful projects you've done? So, for example, UAE has had this issue before, and now suddenly another country in Africa, for
Yep.
example, has similar issue. Are you able to use the experience you've had,
Yeah,
to steer them in the right direction?
absolutely. And actually, in a lot of cases, there are some things that we do that are kind of frustratingly longer gestation periods, and they would be pilot projects, but the reason that we still do them and we still invest time and money in doing them is, and resources, is for us to be able to create that blueprint. Because once you create the kind of basic blueprint of a new transaction, of something innovative and a little bit different to what's available in the market, because it's customized, but we know it's scalable.
Right.
And then when you know it's scalable, you're able to take that. So a lot of times we do something even in Asia, although I don't cover our Asian clients, but anywhere in Asia, for instance, and I could, within the team, within the wider team, we share a lot of these success stories.
Right.
So I'm able to take that and actually go to the clients here, for example, and say, this is something interesting that we've done. We can talk to you about it, but just so you're aware of these, because sometimes clients, even if they don't have an immediate need, they also want to know about these things that are happening, because it helps them navigate, it helps them understand how they can apply it themselves. So absolutely, there are tweaks here and there that you do to cater for the nuances, but in general, there are a lot of success stories that we use like that.
Okay. So let's talk about the success stories. Let's talk about some of the remarkable projects that you've worked on.
Yeah. So it's very difficult to kind of pick one thing over the other, but maybe I'll just highlight some of the kind of more recent things that we've done. Recently worked on a sustainability linked transaction for the government of Cote d'Ivoire, and that was a really interesting transaction, because it helped bring to light a focus on nature. So, where your KPI is linked to specific things that need to be delivered over the kind of the life of the facility. And that was really interesting, because I mean, and I was in Abidjan not too long ago, so it was very nice to kind of see how, what the country is doing from an environmental perspective. So this is kind of one example of something that we've done recently. Another example is a debt for nature swap that we've done a little bit outside of my region, but in the Bahamas. And that was a really interesting project, because we were able to mobilize capital. There was a lot of kind of partnerships involved as well, that helped us bring that project together and actually have that benefit. And I spoke earlier about having that extra level of credibility. So
Right.
Conservation International was also part of that transaction as a partner, and that helped mobilize capital towards preservation of marine life, amongst other things. Another one that to talk about, actually, it could be a blended finance example, is what we have. Part of our innovation hubs is a blended finance hub that looks at, again, the longer gestation period. We've been doing blended finance for a very long time, but this is a little bit more focused in terms of looking at creating country platforms, so where you can work with countries with setups as well, with countries on how they are setting up, for example, their energy mix. What makes sense, what doesn't make sense. I have access to geothermal, but does it make sense for me to have
In my region.
100% geothermal? Does it make sense for me to have a combination of geothermal and solar? So So those are the things that we've, we look at when we look at country platforms, and we recently, we have been working, for example, with the government of Lesotho as an example on how we could advise on the bankability of some of these projects, and what you need to see to put that project to put those projects in place. Um, so these are some of the things. I mean, one of the ones that I'm particularly proud of is a transaction that we've done for PIF, the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and that was interesting because it was a moment of a lot of firsts for the government, for the fund, sorry, for the country, and it provided, like, we did their green financing framework, and then there was an issuance on the back of it. It was the first 100-year green bond. It was something very interesting for the country, because, and it's very much aligned with their strategy,
Right.
with their green strategy for the country, and how they're embedding it in terms of their growth as an economy as well, and how they also filter that down to the portfolio companies. Um, yeah, I think there's a lot more to talk about, to be honest. And I'm sure there will be ones that I have missed out that would have been really good examples. But those are the more recent ones, if
That you've
helpful.
done. So is it that you have more government clients because of the size of the projects?
It depends. So we do quite a lot of work with governments in the continent, and
Right.
in the African continent. We do quite a lot of work with governments in the Middle East as well. But we do quite a lot also with corporates and FIs. And when I talk about FIs, I mean banks, for example, sponsors like funds, for instance. So it's actually very, very wide. But yeah, I appreciate that I've spoken mostly about government related transactions.
Yeah, but I mean, when you
Yeah.
talked about size, because
Yeah.
the size has to be right for your size of bank
Yeah.
to also be involved.
Yeah, I mean, those are very kind of sizable, big transactions, obviously. But like size, when I talk about size, I'm talking about size that is not in the SME type of
Right.
size,
Right.
or I mean, we still do SMEs, but and it depends again on the market. Like in some markets, we do more. We have business banking, for example. We do that for some markets, but there are much smaller projects that we
Right.
do that are very interesting as well, because you see the impact more clearly. You see, how you can, you know, um, how it actually makes a difference, is what I'm trying to say.
Where I come from, it's not all the time that government can respond. And that's why you have the private public partnership.
Yes.
So you have the private that spots an opportunity.
Mhm.
So, for example, maybe it's to have a conservation in a place and sees, or, to build solar farms and sees this big opportunity, right? Now, if the size isn't big enough for your type of organization, what are the different types of sustainable finance available? So you have the DFIs on one side, you have the sovereign funds on the other side. You work with these other big players. Are there other small players that
Yeah.
can attend to the smaller projects?
So there are some solutions that we have in place for that. One solution for that. So obviously it depends on where the client, or not the client, but like that project or that entity is in the life of their business.
Mhm.
Um, but like if you're a more startup type of business, you probably will find more financing available from venture capital, and there are venture capitalists that are looking at these types of investments, family and friends, obviously, that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
still applies in the same way. But also, there are a lot of like venture entities that are looking specifically at green social sustainability projects.
Right.
So from that, for that kind of uh, group, this is where it's more difficult to get lending. I think you can get a lot of depending on your project. There are also a lot of awards in terms of
grants.
one of them is Earthshot, where we're also part of that. But actually, like some of these have been really interesting. We have a program called Women in Tech as well within the bank that where we support women with their kind of developing their own businesses, and that's been really interesting because while it might not always be related directly to sustainability, we've seen quite a lot of them actually going through the sustainability route in terms of what the business looks like and what it addresses. If you're looking at more another solution, actually, for example, smallholder farmers in remote areas in the African continent, for example, like how do you reach them? So a lot of times there are solutions around on lending. So a lot of these banks that are local regional banks in those markets that already do business with these farmers, with these SMEs as well, that we otherwise have maybe constraints for us to onboard them and deal with them just because of our business model or the way that we operate. The nice thing about it is that by empowering those banks, you're able to kind of, and that's the point about mobilizing capital, right? So it's not just about creating that accessibility to those banks to kind of provide that funding or encourage those banks to provide that funding directly to a specific group of people like smallholder farmers. But it's also how you kind of put structures in place that create affordability. And what that means is here you start to think about partnerships that you can bring into a transaction that could reduce the credit risk, and therefore the pricing is better, and therefore they could pass that benefit of that price, of that lower pricing to their clients. And there are a myriad of things that you could put in place to structure something like that. Again, they take a little bit more time, but very much scalable. You do this in Kenya, you can easily do this in Nigeria. You should easily do this, obviously with some tweaks. So this is also another way that we as a bank have been looking at implementing these types of solutions. A lot of times, one thing I would say is that sometimes it's also the phase of where the project is. There is a phase of a project where a bank would get involved, and there is a phase where you still need some sort of technical assistance, grants, in order for it to kind of pick up. And that's where the MDBs and the DFIs who provide these things are able to kind of step in, and we interact quite a lot with those entities because there's a lot of information, there's a lot of work that we do together on a day-to-day basis as well. But there's a lot of flow of information that goes through these systems.
And the thing is, some of these projects, climate adaptation, climate resilience projects, some of them might not be very viable at the beginning.
Exactly.
Which is why you have some governments giving rebates and supporting, and you have the subsidies and all of that. How does that translate to sustainable finance? Because if you're looking at the VCs, you talk about the VCs and the PE, those guys would charge very high rates. Now, the fact that you have the MDBs and some of these development finance institutions support you, does that help to lower the cost of capital that you charge?
Because it depends on also the rating of the entity that you're dealing with, and sometimes you're also capped by the rating, the credit rating of the country, right? So that bringing in that angle, and again, here's where structuring starts to play a role in what you can do to reduce that kind of cost of funding to a certain extent. But in terms of the technical assistance and that stuff, it really helps. Technical assistance and grants, they help kind of get a project off its feet, especially where you have a lot of fixed costs in the beginning of a project. But what we usually tell our clients is and even like our partners in other organizations is make sure that you're bringing us on as early on as possible. because we can then direct towards the tweaks that you need to make in order to make projects bankable. Because when we say about bankable, it's not just how Standard Chartered,
Right.
it's bankable for Standard Chartered. It's likely, it will be bankable by a lot of other organizations with specific tweaks here and there.
Yeah. You can diversify your risk.
100%. And we know that market, right? Like we have syndication teams that work with other banks. We have bond syndicate teams that work with all types of fixed income investors. So all of that then helps you look at not just the bankability, but actually what type of financing is probably going to be suitable for you. Is project financing going to work? Or is it more kind of a structured lending solution that you need to put in place? Or is it a bond? Or is it maybe you qualify for ECA financing? And then you start looking at the different options and you start looking at the cost implications of those different options. Maybe you want to pay a little bit more, but I want to have a longer tenor.
Right.
So that's when the structuring of transactions starts taking effect, basically. And that's why it's important to look at things from the start. So yes, absolutely, they're helpful because they help kind of propel those businesses to do more, and then creates more opportunities for us to go in and do more green or sustainable financing.
Yeah, I feel like I've learned a lot about sustainable finance. So
I'm glad I've been useful today.
So let's talk about you.
Yeah.
I see that you're very active in terms of climate advocacy, and it looks like there's a bit of passion, other than the fact that you do this as a job, right? Tell me more about the things that you've done in this space.
So, look, from my perspective, I think I'm a big fan of the outdoors and being in out in the nature and observing just a lot of these things. And it's a shame sometimes to see that or to think that a lot of that stuff will not be there for the next generation or the generation after it. I really like scuba diving, and I used to do that quite a lot more actually pre-COVID, but I try to still do it a lot now.
You do that in the UAE?
In the UAE, yes, Fujairah, mostly Oman. I spent 2 weeks in Oman in December last year. Went to the Maldives as well last year. I've been to Raja Ampat in Indonesia.
That's so much fun.
I've been to a lot of places like Thailand as well. Thailand I've been to a lot of times actually.
And did you have to learn, or you
Yeah,
that's tough?
Yeah, and it's not just that. Like I started off by doing a beginner dive, and it's really funny. Like when I started doing, I went in and I was encouraged, kind of pushed almost by one of my friends to get it, and she's like really into her diving, and like when I was telling her, I'm just gonna do this certificate and I'm not gonna use it ever again. It's like, why? I'm like, because it's basically teaching me about all the different ways that I'm gonna die. I mean, it's so dangerous. But then obviously with time you start to understand your limitations, you start to get experience. That's why, I keep telling people, if you want to go into it, make sure you're going with a group that you know.
Right.
You're not going beyond your limits, you're listening, you're following instructions to the T. Don't get distracted. Anyway, so looking at some of those things was really interesting. And when I started doing a lot of diving, I mean, you see this kind of marine life, for example, and you start to become obsessed with some of the habits and lifestyles of different types of creatures, and then you start talking about different types of fish that your friends have never heard of,
Right.
and they start to think that you've gone nuts. But it's just looking at these things and how life is also able to just like a body, it's able to heal itself. So being in that in that point where we can still heal is very important. And to me, I've always separated work was, I'm a banker, from sustainability and the way that I deal with things on a day-to-day basis. I'm also very big on the social aspect, and because I think empowering communities means empowering nature. If you have communities that are struggling, they have other priorities. If you provide education and awareness, it's more likely than not that people are going to do something about it.
Sure.
So I've done quite a bit of volunteering work as well with the bank and outside. Standard Chartered gives us 3 days of volunteering leave.
Nice.
And I always get reminded that you haven't taken your volunteering leaves yet for this year. And it's great because it really pushes you to be more involved with the communities that we operate in. And like, you are never short of opportunities. There was always something in my inbox about an opportunity to go volunteer, to do something here, to do something there. But one of the most rewarding experiences I've had was a volunteering activity that I've done with some of my colleagues in Kenya. Uh, we went and we spent time in an orphanage in Nakuru in Kenya. Um, and the reason this was rewarding was because it actually brought to perspective what we it humbles you, first of all. It brings into perspective, the impact that we can have and
Right.
what you can do. So when this kind of sustainable finance opportunity came up, it felt like, it felt like it's something that actually complements or
Right.
adds meaning or value. Not that, the work I was doing was meaningless. It
Right.
was still meaningful. It was very satisfying, and I loved it. But it was kind of bringing in that aspect of meaningfulness for something that I care about in my personal life as well. Um, so yeah, it's really interesting. I'm looking forward to going diving in the Bahamas after they do their marine conservation.
Yeah, so let's talk about Standard Chartered. You have been there for almost 2 decades, and it'll be nice to. I hope that doesn't make you feel old.
It does a little bit when I see some of the young people coming in, but yeah,
You look young.
yeah, exactly. I just don't tell them. I don't tell them how long I've been in the bank. I
Right.
don't tell them when I joined, when I graduated. These are all cues.
I know. But it's, today's world, it's almost like if you say you've stayed long in a place, it feels like, why would you be that loyal to an
Yeah.
employer? Like,
Yeah.
everyone is like, just pivot, move,
Yeah.
just get the money.
I get that.
What,
I
what,
get
what,
that a lot.
what has been the motivation for you
I mean,
to stay?
I think the downside of it is that, sometimes I'm curious about how things look like, how the rest of the world lives, for example. How do things look like on the other
On the
side
other
as
side,
well?
right?
That curiosity does come to mind. But the thing is, it's not about it's also, and I get these questions a lot from friends, from family, and etc. But I think the great thing about Standard Chartered is that, first of all, it's a place that has given me a lot of opportunities, and a lot of opportunities, not just kind of from a country or geography perspective, but actually, you know what, like, I was doing corporate finance, and then something came up, and it was like, there's an opportunity in coverage banking.
Yeah.
You'd be suitable for it. That angle, or even when I moved into sustainable finance as well, there's always that angle of, you are doing there's someone out there who's willing to take a risk on you.
Right.
And I really like that because it also brings diversity in thinking. So going from, corporate finance to coverage, and then suddenly into sustainable finance, there are skills there that
Yeah.
have helped me in this career, in sustainable finance. But then there are also different views that I bring to the table, potentially, right? And that's how, the bank looks at things. It's also that I've never been bored. It's like, it's the fact that you're constantly
Different
learning,
challenges.
you're challenged, you're being thrown in some things. Um, One of the things I really love about the bank is, again, the markets that we cover. I get a lot of energy, from just kind of on a business trip where I spent, 3 or 4 days constantly from 8 a.m. until 9 or 10 p.m. I'm either meeting clients, going to events, interacting with our colleagues on the ground. And I don't even feel tired. Like, it's one of those things that, I definitely crash when I come
Right.
back over the weekend. But it's like the level of energy that you get, and seeing the impact that you're actually creating,
Right.
and being able to provide help, like where you are, you are in a position where you can help someone do something good. Um, it goes back to your previous question of, that combining your professional life with your social, or not social life, but like your personal interest, your passion. Um, and I think that angle is what makes me feel that what we're doing in Standard Chartered really matters. It impacts communities. Also the people, like the people I work with. I learn a lot every day from my colleagues. The type of individuals that we are able to bring into the bank and that we are able to attract, and just the conversations I have with them, it's so enriching as well. You learn so much from a lot of these individuals, and that's kind of, you know, very self-fulfilling, if
Yeah,
you like.
yeah, yeah. So I totally agree with you. And I think for me, it would be, what would be your advice for people that want to have a rewarding career? And I'll give you an example. I stayed in, one of the big four for almost 20 decades. I came in as an associate and then moved from, it was a long ride, but
Yeah.
I stayed because, just like you, was interesting. I was always challenged. But apart from the pay as well, there was also the progression in my career. So I could see the progression all the way up. But there was something I realized at some point in my career, my technical skills was not enough anymore.
Yeah.
It was, what is the value
Yeah.
that I can bring? So we're all, I mean, you know how it is. You're aspiring to be a manager or a partner, and there are many people vying for the same position, but you all can get it if you all bring something unique. So in your case, what would be your advice to, young people that are trying to build a career in terms of bringing value to the business?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think one thing, there are several things I would say. One part of it is be curious. I think being curious is very important. It makes you ask the right questions. It gets you exposed to different people. Like sometimes, some of the most interesting questions I get from the most junior members of our team. And a lot of times the amount of discussion it sparks around, you know, can we, would it be possible for us to do this? Like just something random that they throw, and you're like, never been done, let's try.
Right.
And I think that's because of curiosity. You're curious. You're like, okay, if it doesn't work, you know why it doesn't work then. And you're constantly learning. By curious, I mean always learn. Which brings me to the next point. For me, what has worked, and I was having this conversation recently with someone who's starting out their career, and and for me, what was beneficial is actually being technical in the beginning was very helpful.
Right.
Because when you're technical and then you kind of move more to strategic roles as you become more senior, you know the technical stuff.
Right.
You know how to solve for a structure or a legal documentation issue that you can potentially cover somewhere else.
Right.
Those are things that have been, I found, to be very beneficial for me later on in my career, especially when I moved more into a coverage role. Even in sustainable finance, it is a coverage role. I'm looking after relationships from a sustainable finance perspective with clients. But if I don't know my technical stuff, it's very, you run out of content very quickly, right? So that's kind of the second point. Um, the third point I would say is be passionate about what you do. If this is just a job, it will show.
Yeah.
But if it's something that actually matters to you, and like pursue something that matters to you, because if you pursue something that matters to you, the passion will come out in a conversation you're having, the way that you will jump into the body language, the way that you will jump into a conversation is very different. And also you start to become, you start to influence people. You start to become inspirational to other people as well, who see that and they want to talk to you. They want to do something with you. The final thing I would say is, especially for people who are starting off their careers, is don't worry about the money.
Hmm.
It will come.
It would.
It will come.
Yeah.
That promotion, that money, it will come. But just do what you need to do in order to build your skills.
Yeah.
Spend that time where you're building those skills, that capability, whether it's technical or not. Again, it worked for me. For other careers, it might be different. But just make sure you're understanding what matters, and don't be passive. Because if you're passive, it's great. Like you'll get a check at the end of the month, but again, it's a job. But you could probably do something that you enjoy. You spend half of your life
Doing-
at work, right? Half of your day is at work. You probably spend more than half of your day at work with your colleagues and with your own family.
Yeah.
So make it count. Make it something that you actually want to I don't know, change the world with,
Sure.
or something that matters to you personally.
Right.
It doesn't have to change the world, doesn't have to matter to other people, but it actually makes you better at what you do, is my view.
I agree with you. Be curious, be technical, be passionate, and don't worry about the money.
It'll come.
Absolutely, because nowadays you have a lot of packaging,
Yeah.
and when you remove the package, there's
Yep.
nothing inside.
Yeah.
Absolutely, you have to have something inside,
Yeah.
and yeah,
And don't. But the final thing I would say, one more thing actually, because this was an advice that someone gave me. Your career is never going to be a straight line.
absolutely,
It's absolutely okay. The
yeah,
number of times that people, go back and then jump up, or they go, lateral moves, and then they suddenly their career spikes. It's never going to be a straight line. Maybe never say never, but
yeah,
it's very rare for it to be predictable, especially in our changing world,
yeah,
with AI also becoming a part of our lives, sustainability, etc. There are a lot of opportunities, and it's okay. It's okay to kind of even make mistakes in the beginning where you're coming in. You're like, you know what, this is not for me.
yeah.
Make the move. It's okay.
Right. I think that's it. On a lighter note, I'm just curious. I already know you in terms of scuba diving and pulling a trick on me that you did earlier today.
Yeah.
What do your colleagues, what don't they know about you? What's one interesting fun fact about you?
I think we know everything about me. But I think maybe one of the things that my family or my friends sometimes tell me is that it's funny when I do something, I do it to the extreme.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I go to the extreme of implementing it or doing it. It could be a sport. It could
Mm-hmm.
be like, for example, I take up a sport and then suddenly I'm doing it every day, and it's like you can do it twice a week or three times
Right.
a week, for example.
You're
Yeah, I'm extra, exactly. Or I just don't do it. It's a very weird thing. But yeah, I don't think there's anything in particular on it
that they don't know.
that they don't know about me. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. This is really, really interesting.